Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. Here we are, Friday, and do you realize this month's almost gone? Whew. Anyway, we are continuing our response and refutation of the book by my friend Steve Gregg entitled Why Not Full Preterism? As I've shared with you before, this book is obviously aimed at refuting Don Preston. He mentions my name some 140 times in the book. And as I've said, that's just fine. That's not a problem whatsoever. Steve's very cordial for the most part in the book. But nonetheless, what we're doing here is we are examining Steve's final, may I say, summary arguments against the full preterist view. And what he is doing is he is listing some of the arguments made by full preterists and then giving a brief refutation or ostensible refutation of the argument. As I have noted, some of the accusations that Steve makes against full preterists in regard to what we supposedly believe have just been blatantly false, and that's unfortunate. It shows me that Steve either has not continued to do any study, or he's just simply ignorant of what we're saying. In any case, it's very unfortunate that he's made the accusations. Now, before I go any further, we're almost through with our examination of the book, all right? And as I have said, my Friday videos are basically for the purpose of refuting what skeptics and deniers of the full preterist view are saying. So, as I've already said a couple of different times, I need your suggestions. I've got a couple of things in mind. I've got a very scholarly book laying on my desk entitled The Future of Rome. It is a book attempting to prove that the book of Revelation was written about and is primarily concerned with the destruction of Rome. It's not about the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. Now, this is one of the more scholarly works that has been written attempting to establish the late date and, and the focus of the book of Revelation. So, like I said, I've been thinking about doing that. One of the reasons I've been thinking about doing that is because a former preterist by the name of Derek Lambert, who hosts a video series, well, it's an entire blog. He's now an atheist. And he had initially said that he would be willing to have me on to discuss, not debate, but to discuss the dating of Revelation. I said, I'd be glad to do that. Well, he kept procrastinating, and I kept asking, when are we going to do this? He finally said, well, I'll try to find somebody to debate you. He couldn't find anybody to debate me. And so finally, after being pressed a bit more, he sent me a copy of this book, or he told me about this book, and so I've gotten it. And again, it's quite a scholarly production, very well-known scholars, attempting to prove that the book of Revelation was written after AD 70 and is focused on the fall of Jerusalem. Now, that's a very important topic, needless to say. So that's certainly one idea. Just recently, someone sent me a link to a video. I've forgotten the gentleman's name, but he was giving 12 reasons why preterism is false. And this guy has something like 70,000 subscribers. Now, I posted a challenge to debate me on that site, on that YouTube channel, urging him to contact me. I haven't heard a word. Evidently, he doesn't want to discuss the issue. So I thought, well, okay, I'll write down the link, and I'll write down the reasons, these 12 reasons why this gentleman believes that preterism is false, and I'll just take each one of those 12 reasons or arguments, and I'll share them with you, and I'll refute them. So let me know. I've had other suggestions some of which I'll be really honest with you, I'm not very interested in doing. I don't feel that they're major issues at all. I don't feel that they're necessary issues at all. So I say all of that to remind you, if there's a subject, if there's a book that you would like for me to read, to address, and to refute, to review and to refute, then here on YouTube, post that suggestion under this video. All right, send me an email, and I will carefully consider it. So here's your opportunity to have your input into what I will be doing in the very near future here on Responding to the Critics on YouTube and Facebook. Okay, so we return to our examination of Steve Gregg's book, and we're on page 358. And when I very first read the book, which has been some good time now ago, I was literally quite stunned that Steve would actually say what he did. And to follow that up, I have to say I've been literally stunned by an awful lot of the things that Steve said in this book in his attempt to refute covenant eschatology. So on page 358, he says, and again, he's giving what preterists believe, the preterist argument, and giving a refutation. I'm sorry, that's page 359. Well, I guess I turned the wrong page there. My apologies again. Now then, page 360. All right. Point number 17 in Steve's closing summary arguments and refutations. The death penalty of Genesis 2:17 was not physical death. So here, Steve Gregg says, is the full preterist argument. Adam's sin death was not physical death. How could it be? Were Adam and Eve's bodies changed physiologically when they sinned, making them mortal? I got to tell you, Steve, I want to be very kind here, very respectful. Steve sort of kind of plays some games with what preterists actually say. He's not giving the actual preterist argument. More on that in a moment. So here's Steve's response. No such change was necessary. You got to catch the power of what he now says. Adam and Eve were never anything other than mortals. Folks, do you catch that? Let me read that again. Adam and Eve were never anything other than mortals. That is a characteristic that distinguishes all created beings from the Creator, who alone possesses immortality. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 16. Mortals like ourselves and like our first parents must seek for immortality in Christ, Romans chapter 2, verse 7. Represented in this case in the tree of life. The condition required for our first parents to live forever was not simply to refuse sin, but to eat of the tree of life. Their sin disqualified them for this privilege, thus preventing them from living forever. There was no need for their bodies to have undergone physiological transformation in order to be mortal. They were created that way. Wow. And again, I'm trying hard, and I am, being very respectful to Steve. It is more than obvious to me that Steve absolutely does not see the train coming that he himself put on the tracks. First of all, let's take a look at what he represents the preterist argument to be. Adam's sin death was not physical death, so say preterists, right? How can it be? Were Adam and Eve's bodies changed physiologically when they sinned, making them mortal? Well, ladies and gentlemen, every preterist that I'm aware of understands that Adam and Eve were made mortal, just like Steve believes. Every preterist that I'm aware of believes, maybe there are some who differ, but the great majority, all of them that I know, believe that Adam and Eve were not only made mortal, but they also believe, oh, and by the way, preterists believe that death existed prior to sin. Now, Steve obviously doesn't believe that because of the tree of life. But you see, Steve has some real issues here. But first of all, let me point out that a growing number of scholars in our world believe that death existed in the garden before sin. N.T. Wright does. I had 2 formal public debates with Dr. David Hester, a professor at Faulkner University in Montgomery, Alabama, in a series of written questions to him, one of which is death, physical death, the enemy of the child of God. He responded by saying physical death existed prior to sin. Physical death was not the curse. I literally laughed when I read his answers. Okay, so physical death was not the curse because physical death existed before sin. But the last enemy to be destroyed is physical death, said Dr. David Hester. Well, if physical death was not the curse, then it was not the enemy. Where would that idea ever come from? Okay, enough on that. So here we have my friend Steve Gregg saying Adam and Eve were made mortal. I agree. I believe death, physical death, existed in the garden before sin. Now, I've not been able to find in the book where Steve actually says that Adam and Eve, or excuse me, that death, biological death, existed in the garden before sin. Haven't found that. Maybe I overlooked it as I read the book. So if any of you have read that comment from Steve, then please pass that on. Give me the page number and what have you. But the very fact that Steve says Adam and Eve were made mortal brings up a very serious question. If they were made mortal, what would have happened had they not eaten of the tree of life? After all, God, in kicking them out, said, they've sinned, and we're going to kick them out lest they eat of the tree of life and live forever. So if they had not eaten of the tree of life in the garden, one of 2 things. Number 1, if they had not eaten, they would have died biologically. But it certainly would have been a death without any curse, right? No curse whatsoever. Pardon me, after all, they're mortal. And if they did not eat the tree to live forever, then being mortal, they would have eventually died. Got that? Okay. Secondly, they obviously had not eaten of the tree of life because God said, if we leave them alone, they're going to eat the tree of life and live forever. So Adam and Eve had never eaten of the tree of life, which means, being mortal, they would have died, which means physical death was not their enemy. Physical death was not a curse. Because he made them mortal, he made them mortal for them to die. After all, once again, if they ate the tree one time, live forever. But they hadn't eaten. So Steve obviously does not see this train coming for himself. Secondly, let me make this observation. He says that Adam's sin death was not physical death. How could it be? Were Adam and Eve's bodies changed physiologically when they sinned, making them mortal? Well, again, no, that's not what preterists believe. It's a misrepresentation. We believe that Adam and Eve was mortal, and without eating the tree of life, they would have died biologically anyway. Therefore, the state or the conditionality of death, biological death, was already residing on Adam and Eve as a natural part of creation. And if it was a natural part of the creation, then their mortality, their subjection to the reality of ultimate death, since they were mortal, would have been a good thing. Because after all, before sin, God declared everything that he had created, that includes Adam and Eve, in a state of mortality, in a state subject to physical death, was good. Are you following me here? Secondly, preterists do not say that they were changed, therefore, biologically or physiologically. No, we don't say that at all. What we do say is that God said to Adam and Eve concerning the forbidden fruit, concerning the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will not eat thereof, for in the day you eat, you will surely die. Now, mind you, they were already mortal, subject to physical death. Now, one of two things. God is telling them that in the day they eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and since they had not already taken of the tree of life, they would die biologically that very day. And listen, the Hebrew of the text does not say you'll become mortal. They already were mortal. Steve Gregg agrees. So God wasn't saying you're going to become changed physiologically. They didn't need to be changed physiologically. Or number two, God was threatening them with something besides physical death. This is the preterist argument. The preterist argument is the very day they ate the fruit, the very day they ate the fruit, they were cast out of the garden. Being cast out of the garden, they were alienated from God. They were suffering the reality of, quote, sin, death, which is separation from God. To use the term, I know it's not the optimum term, but to use the term spiritual death. No, their spirit did not die. That's not what I'm saying. But they had a spiritual fellowship with God that was terminated that day. You know what? I never will forget, and I got to hurry here. But some time ago, in a written debate, I've forgotten who it was with right now, but my opponent said they were not alienated from God that day. They didn't lose fellowship with God that day because, after all, after they were kicked out of the garden, kicked out of the garden, God was still talking to them. That means they were not alienated. And I was like, seriously? Listen, I know an awful lot of people that have been married to people and got divorced, and yet they still talk to them. I got a good friend right here in Ardmore, divorced, yet their former spouse visits them, help do things around the house, make sure everything's okay. That happens all the time. Does that mean they were not divorced? You see, this is a great example of argumentum ad desperatum. It's just a ridiculous argument. As I sometimes want to say, doesn't even make good nonsense. Okay. Now, before I go any further, let me urge you that you go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and there in the search bar, look up the term death of the garden. Dr. Dallas Burdett, my great friend from Alabama, who is a true scholar, He used to teach Hebrew and Greek both at university level. He wrote an article on the death of the garden. He goes in depth into the Hebrew. And by the way, he points out, he shows from a vast variety of top-notch, world-class Hebrew scholars that the terminology, in the day you eat, you will surely die, does not mean you will die one day. No, it is explicit, it is emphatic. The very day you eat, you will die. Not 900 years later, as we are told, the day you eat. And so here we have Steve telling us that the secret here, the secret to their immortality, is the tree of life. Well, I'm running out of time here, and there's an awful lot that I would sort of kind of like to talk about, but it would take me beyond what time-wise what I want to do. But I want you to notice that the tree of life is for Steve the key to immortality. He takes the tree of life in the garden as some kind of a literal, physical tree. And by the way, in his description of the new heaven and new earth and in the New Jerusalem, that's where the tree of life is. Now, let me ask you something, to consider something. If the new heaven and new earth is the literal physical new heaven and new earth, the renovated physical earth, as Steve Gregg believes, or if the new heaven and new earth is, as many amillennialists and some postmillennialists believe, if it's heaven, not a renovated earth, but if it's heaven, if the tree of life is on the renovated, recreated earth, or if it's in heaven. And for instance, some preterist, Ed Stevens says, tree of life is in heaven. Okay, for all of those who believe that the tree of life was a literal physical tree that would give immortality in the Garden of Eden, then since those individuals believe that the tree of life, I'm assuming the same literal physical tree of life that would give immortality, since that tree of life is to be, we are told, in the new heaven and new earth on the earth, or it's to be in heaven, are we supposed to believe that God removed that literal physical tree that would give literal immortality to physical bodies? So it's supposed to be in the new heaven and new earth on earth, or in heaven. So here's the question. Will those in the new heaven and new earth on earth have to eat the literal physical fruit of the literal physical tree of life to have immortality? Or will those in heaven have to take the tree of life to have immortality? Anybody see a train coming here? As far as I'm concerned, the train has its lights flashing and its horn blaring, and it's right there. Why? Well, according to Paul, 2 Timothy chapter 1, God through Christ brought life and immortality to light through the gospel, not through a physical tree of life. And Jesus said that if any man eats my flesh and eats my blood, he shall never die. Jesus said, if any man keeps my saying, he will never die. Jesus said, John 8:51, Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. If a man believe in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And if a man believes in me, he will never die. Isn't that immortality? Why didn't Jesus say, now look, guys, if you believe in me, when you are raised from the dead, oh, and wait a minute, Steve believes that people are raised from the dead at the end of time, and they're raised immortal and incorruptible. Okay? If they're raised immortal and incorruptible, biological bodies, why would they have to take the tree of life? Because you see, tree of life in the garden would give immortality. What does the tree of life in the new heaven and new earth, or in heaven, what does the tree of life impart? If a person is in Christ, they are already begotten again through a living hope unto an inheritance incorruptible, undefiled, that does not fade away, reserved in heaven. They are already born again, not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible. Okay, if by becoming a child of God, I am born again of incorruptible seed, then what is my nature? Oh, well, we're still corruptible. How are we born again of incorruptible seed and we're still corruptible? Are we not children of God? If we're children of God, then we have been born again of incorruptible seed. If someone or something is born of incorruptible seed, they are incorruptible. Now, I think you're going to agree with me. That's not talking about this stuff right here. That's not talking about biological flesh, right? But the gift of God is eternal life. Not for tissue, not for flesh and blood, but for us nonetheless. And so Steve, with his view of the garden and mortality and death, has, I would suggest to you, basically given the farm away. And as I sometimes like to say, he gave away the farm, the horses, the cows, the dogs, the cats, the gerbil, goldfish, etc. He gave it all away. If biological death is not the curse, then biological death is not the curse that would have to be removed through resurrection. And thus Steve's entire futurist eschatology, which revolves around physiological, biological resurrection, goes up in smoke. Okay? Okay, now, don't forget, folks, we're right at the end of this month. Do not forget this month's fantastic special. We shall meet him there, the wedding of the King of Kings, and leaving the rapture behind. If you bought these books separately, you'd pay at least $12 more than you'll pay through this month's very good special. Go to my website, donkpreston.com or BibleProphecy.com. Click on the banner at top. Your total delivered price for the rest of this month, 2023 U.S. orders only, $25 postpaid. All right? Take advantage of it. You'll be glad you did. Don't forget, Mike Solomon and I will be back with you tonight as we continue our review of the Mike Brown and Steve Gregg debate. And you do not want to miss that as we discuss Romans chapter 11. See you there.